They rode him out of the great hall on a black horse with no saddle and no reins. They tied his wrists with silver cord, and they laughed when the cord burned his skin. They threw a deed at his feet on the worst hillside in the kingdom, and they told him the tomb beneath that hill was his now. They said the stone was cursed. They said the ground drank everything that knelt on it. The blood-red moon hung above them, and the noble houses raised their cups, and they toasted to his ruin. He did not speak. He did not beg. He stepped down from the horse in his torn black velvet, and he picked up the deed from the dirt. He folded it once. He folded it twice. He slid it inside his coat. Then he turned and he walked toward the tomb alone. Why would a man walk willingly into a curse? Stay with me on this one. I was born into the third house of the kingdom of Velmore. My father was Lord Kalen of the bloodline Vance, and my mother was a quiet woman from the Silver Lake country who never learned to love the marble halls she had married into. I was the youngest of four. The other three were strong. They were tall. They could ride a horse through a winter storm and laugh about it the next morning. I could not. I was pale even by vampire standards. My eyes were the wrong color. The bloodlines of Velmore all had eyes like wine or smoke or candlelight. Mine were gray. Cold gray. The gray of river ice. The gray of a sky that has forgotten the sun. My nurse told me when I was very young that the gray-eyed children of the houses were never lucky. I did not understand her then. I understood her later. The houses of Velmore were old. Older than the kingdom itself. There were 9 of them, and they sat together in council under a black glass ceiling that showed the moon. They feuded constantly. They wed and they betrayed, and they swore vows in candlelight that they broke before sunrise. But on one matter they all agreed. The third house, my house, was the weakest. My father knew this. My mother knew this. And the other houses knew it best of all. They sniffed at my brothers when they passed in the corridors. They asked my sister to dance, and then they did not dance with her. They watched us at the long table, and they smiled the way wolves smile when a young deer steps too close. I grew up in the libraries. I could not match my brothers at the sword, and I could not match my sister at the hunt. So I read. I read the histories of the 9 houses. I read the old laws of the council. I read the ancient charters that bound every bloodline to the soil of Velmore. I read until my eyes ached and the candles burned down to nothing. And in the bottom of one forgotten shelf, in a book bound in cracked leather and locked with a brass clasp, I read about something else. I read about the ley lines. I read about the vault beneath the worst hill in the kingdom. I read about a sealed pact written by the first vampire who ever walked these lands. And I read what that pact could do for the one who learned to listen to it. I told no one. I was 16 by the count of years, though my body and my hunger were older. I closed the book. I returned it to its shelf. I went to dinner that night and I sat beside my mother, and I did not speak. She asked me what I had been reading. I told her poetry. She smiled at me with the sad smile she always had. She did not believe me. She did not press. My father died when I was 20. He fell from a high balcony during a council feast, and the houses said it was wine and an old man's mistake. I knew it was not. My brothers knew it was not. We never said it aloud. My eldest brother took the seat at the head of the table. He held it for 3 months. Then he was found in the gardens with a silver pin through his throat. My second brother lasted 6 months. My third brother, the gentle one, the one who used to read to me when I was a child, lasted almost a year. They poisoned his cup at a wedding. I was the only one left of the male line of the third house. I was 22 years old by the count of years. The council called me before them on a night with a blood-red moon. I walked into the great hall in my father's black velvet, which was too large for my shoulders, and I stood in the center of the marble floor while the 8 houses watched me from their 9 carved chairs. The 9th chair, the chair of the third house, was empty. They did not invite me to sit. They told me I was disowned. They told me the third house was finished. They told me my mother would be given to a kinder house, and my sister would be wed to whoever would take her, and that I, the last gray-eyed son of a finished bloodline, would be given a gift to remember them by. They smiled when they said the word gift. They handed me a deed sealed in black wax. They told me the tomb on the worst hill in Velmore was now my estate. They told me the ground there was cursed, and that no vampire who had ever slept beneath that hill had woken again. They laughed, all 8 of them. They raised their cups. They drank to the death of my house. I walked back through the marble corridors that night, and I did not weep. I went to my mother. I kissed her forehead. I told her I loved her. I told her she would never see me again. She did not argue. She had seen 4 men of her family die in 2 years, and she had no tears left to spend on the 5th. She gave me her wedding ring. She told me to wear it on the smallest finger of my right hand. She told me that ring had belonged to her mother and her mother's mother, and that it had been worn by the first woman of the Silver Lake country who ever crossed the border into Velmore. She told me to remember where I came from, because the marble halls had never been my real home. I put the ring on my finger. I have never taken it off. They rode me out at the next moonrise. The hill was a black wound on the kingdom. The wind came down from the high crags, and it carried dust and ash and the smell of old iron. Nothing grew there. The stones leaned at angles that hurt the eye. The tomb itself was a low hump of cracked granite, with a door of black bronze that had not been opened in 1,000 years. The escort dropped me at the foot of the path, and they wheeled their horses around, and they did not look back. I heard them laughing as they rode home. I heard the laughter for a long time after they were gone, because the wind carried it back up the hill and pushed it into my ears like a final insult. I sat in the dust at the foot of the path, and I looked at the tomb. I looked at it for an hour, maybe 2. The moon turned in the sky above me. I thought about my mother. I thought about my brothers. I thought about the cracked leather book in the third house library, and the page where I had read about a sealed pact written by the first vampire who ever walked these lands. I stood up. I climbed the path. I put my hand on the bronze door. It was cold. The cold went straight through my palm and up into my chest, and it sat behind my ribs like a coin of ice. I pushed. The door did not move. I pushed again. The door opened a finger's width, and then it stuck. I leaned my shoulder against it. I pushed with everything in me, every grain of grief and rage and shame, and the door swung inward on hinges that screamed like something living. Dust fell from the ceiling. The smell that came out of the tomb was not the smell of death. It was older than death. It was the smell of stone that had been waiting. I walked inside. I closed the door behind me. I knelt in the dust. And then I began to do what I had read about in the cracked book. I pressed my left palm to the floor. I pressed my forehead to the back of my left hand. I spoke 7 words in the oldest tongue of the first vampires, words I had memorized when I was 16 years old in a library nobody else cared to enter. The stones beneath me grew warm. The air thickened. Something deep beneath the hill, something asleep for 10,000 years, opened one eye and noticed me. I did not flinch. I spoke the 7 words again. The stones grew warmer. The thing beneath the hill breathed in, and it breathed out, and the wind on the hillside above me died for a moment as if the whole world had paused to listen. I felt the ley line. I felt it the way you feel a deep river beneath thin ice. It was vast. It was alive. And it had been waiting for someone who knew the 7 words. I bowed my head to the floor. I made my offer. I would tend this hill. I would build above this vault. I would keep the seal. I would guard the sleeping thing. In return, I asked only this. Let me drink moonlight without burning. Let me grow strong beneath the worst hill in the kingdom. Let me build a house that the 9 houses could not pull down. The thing beneath the hill considered me for a long time. Then it agreed. The stones beneath my hand sealed the pact. A mark like a black star burned itself into the floor of the tomb. I felt the heat of it on my palm, but it did not hurt me. I knew then that the pact had taken hold. I rose from the floor. I walked back to the bronze door. I opened it. I stepped out into the moonlight. The blood-red moon was gone now. A clean white moon hung in its place. Pure moonlight. The kind of moonlight that burns the skin of every vampire alive. I stood in it and I waited for the pain. The pain did not come. I held up my hand. The skin was untouched. I laughed once. It was the first sound I had made in days. I sat down on the cold dust of the hill that was now my own, and I watched the white moon cross the sky, and I felt something for the first time in my life that was not fear. I felt patience. I built slowly. I did not rush. The houses of Velmore had given me a century in their minds. They thought the curse would have finished me in a year. They forgot about me by the third spring. They told the story of the disowned, gray-eyed boy at their feasts for a season or two, and then they laughed at newer victims, and the third house faded from their tongues. My mother died in the 8th year. My sister married into a minor branch of the 7th house, and I never saw her again. I heard on the wind that she had 3 children, and that she died of grief when the second one was killed in a duel. I did not go to her funeral. I could not. I had work. The work was patient work. I dug. I quarried. I learned the deep stone of the hill, and I learned what it could hold and what it could not. I tended the seal and the floor of the tomb. I spoke the 7 words once a month, on the night of the dark moon, and the ley line breathed beneath me and grew stronger. I drank the white moonlight every night and my body changed. I grew taller. My shoulders broadened. The gray of my eyes became deeper and stranger, like the gray of a winter sea, and people who saw me from a distance began to step back without knowing why. In the 3rd decade, I began to take in others. They came to me one by one. Disowned children of broken houses. Bastards from the smaller bloodlines. Women who had been promised to old men and who had run away into the wild country. A boy with a clubfoot whose own father had thrown him into the river. I did not turn any of them away. I tested them. I made them speak the truth of why they had come. And if their truth was clean, I took them in. I taught them the patience that the hill had taught me. I taught them to drink moonlight. I taught them to listen to stone. The pact I learned could be extended. I could share its protection with those I bound to me, and bind them I did, one by one, with 7 words and a drop of my own blood at the threshold of the tomb. In the 40th year, I had 32 of them. In the 60th year, I had 200. In the 80th year, I had over 1,000, and the worst hill in the kingdom was no longer worst. The black stone of the tomb had become the foundation of a cathedral. The bronze door was now a gate of obsidian and silver, 3 stories high, hinged on bones older than Velmore. The walls climbed the hill in concentric rings. The towers rose against the sky like the fingers of a slow, patient hand. The shape was beautiful in the way that a wolf is beautiful. You did not want to be close to it, but you could not look away from it either. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. It tells me you want the rest of these. The houses of Velmore saw the towers in the 83rd year. They sent a single rider to the foot of my hill to ask the meaning of it. The rider was a young captain of the 5th house, dressed in red leather and silver, with a long thin sword on his hip and an arrogant tilt to his chin. He did not dismount. He sat on his horse at the bottom of the path, and he called up to my gate, and he asked who was lord of this estate. The boy who carried my reply walked down the path with my answer written on a single piece of black paper. The paper said only this: Kalen Vance of the 3rd house. Send a heavier rider next time. The captain rode back to the council in a rage. The houses laughed at his rage. They told themselves there must be some mistake. The 3rd house was finished. The gray-eyed boy was a corpse in a cursed tomb. Someone had taken the name. Some pretender. Some thief. They sent a heavier rider. A general of the 1st house this time. He came with 12 knights and a banner of black and gold. He sat at the foot of my hill, and he commanded me to descend and explain myself before the Council of Nine. I sent down a different boy with a different paper. The paper said this: the third house no longer answers to a council that disowned it. Ride home. The general came up the hill on his horse with his 12 knights behind him. They reached the obsidian gate. They beat their gauntlets against it. They demanded entry. From the tower above the gate, I looked down at them. I did not show myself. I let them shout for an hour. Then I opened the smallest postern in the great gate, and I stepped out alone, in plain black, with no sword and no crown, and I stood on the threshold and I asked the general what business he had at my door. He looked at me for a long moment. He did not know me. The boy he had last seen had been 22 and starving and dressed in a coat too large for him. The man on the threshold was 83 years older. The man on the threshold was taller, calmer, harder. The man on the threshold had eyes the color of deep winter ice. The general's horse smelled the wrongness on the hill and tried to step back. The general held the rein and dismounted. He demanded my surrender to the council. I refused him quietly. He drew his sword. I looked at the sword. I looked at the general. I did not move. I said this: she that. Mount your horse. Ride home. Tell the council that the third house has built itself a cathedral, and that the cathedral will not be moved. Tell them the hill they cursed has become something else. Tell them I bear no grudge. Tell them to leave me alone. He laughed. He swung the sword. The blade struck my collarbone and broke against my skin. It did not cut me. It snapped clean in two, as if I had been carved out of the same obsidian as my gate. The general stared at the broken stub of the sword in his hand. His 12 knights went very still on their horses. I closed my hand around the general's wrist, gently, and I felt the bones move under his glove like dry sticks. I did not break them. I let go. I said this: ride home. He rode home. That was the first warning. The council laughed at it for 3 months. Then they began to gather their bannermen. I want you to understand what they were planning. They were not planning a quarrel. They were planning an extinction. The 9 houses had ruled Velmore for 2,000 years, and they had never been answered to. They had never had a single coven of a disowned bloodline rise against them. They had certainly never seen a cathedral built on a cursed hill by a man they had thrown into a tomb. They saw in my towers the end of their world, and the end of their world could not be allowed. They sent their criers across the kingdom. They called every banner of every house. They called the cavalry of the high crags, and the swordsmen of the lake country, and the long archers of the southern forest. They called the elder vampires from the deep caves, who had not walked above ground in 300 years. They called the priests of the old blood, who could speak words that broke other men's spells. They called everyone. They marched in the 90th year. The procession was 4 miles long. The banners blacked out the sun. The drums could be heard from the worst hill, where I stood on my highest tower and watched them come. I had my coven below me. 1,000 and more. They were ready. They had drunk moonlight for 40 years, some of them. They were faster and stronger than the elder vampires of the deep caves. They were calmer than the long archers. They were truer than the priests of the old blood. But I did not need them to fight. I had built the cathedral for a different reason. The pact in the floor of the tomb had grown for a century. The ley line beneath the hill was no longer a sleeping river. It was a thrumming engine. I had quietly tied every other ley line in Velmore to mine. Every one. Every bloodline of the 9 houses drew, without knowing it, on the deep stone of the kingdom. And the deep stone of the kingdom now answered only to the worst hill. I could feel them in the soles of my feet. Every general, every elder, every priest, every horse and every banner and every drum. They all walked toward my gate, and the ground beneath them was a leash, and I was holding the leash and they did not know. I let them come close. I let them ring my hill. I let them set their banners and beat their drums and shout their challenges. I let the elder vampires of the deep caves come to the foot of my gate and demand the surrender of the disowned gray-eyed boy. I let the priests of the old blood begin their breaking words against my obsidian walls. The breaking words slid off the stone like water off a slate roof. The walls did not even hum. Then I spoke 7 words from the highest tower. I spoke them quietly. I did not shout. The thing beneath the hill, which had been my partner for a century, breathed in. The drums on the plain below went silent first. The horses screamed and folded their knees. The banners fell. The elder vampires of the deep caves, who had not walked above ground in 300 years, dropped to the dust where they stood. The priests of the old blood clawed at their own mouths because their breaking words had been turned and were now breaking them. The generals of the 9 houses, every one of them, sank to their knees in the cursed soil at the base of my hill. They could not stand. They could not lift their swords. They could not even raise their heads. I came down from my tower. I walked through the inner ring and through the outer ring, and through the obsidian gate, and down the path that I had walked alone in torn black velvet 100 years before. I walked in plain black again. I wore my mother's silver ring on the smallest finger of my right hand. I did not carry a weapon. I did not need one. The cursed soil held them all for me. I stopped in the center of the plain. The sun had set. The white moon was high. Pure moonlight fell on every general of the 9 houses. They began to burn. I did not. I stood in the moonlight and I felt nothing but the cool light on my skin, and I looked down at the men who had cursed my house, and I let them understand in the long, slow silence who I was. They understood. Some of them wept. Some of them prayed to gods who could not hear them. Some of them tried, very quietly, to apologize. I did not answer those. I spoke to all of them at once. I said this: "You disowned me. You gave me a tomb. You laughed when I walked to it. You forgot me before the next moon. You built your lives on the belief that nothing could grow from a cursed hill. You were wrong. The hill grew. The tomb grew. The man you threw away grew. I bear you no grudge. I have outlived my grudge by 100 years. I do not need your apologies. I do not need your blood. I only need one thing from you. Kneel. Stay kneeling. And when I tell you to rise, rise." They did not move. They could not. The ground held them. I let the moonlight finish what it had started with their bannermen on the outer edges. I did not let it touch the generals or the priests or the elders. Those I needed alive. When the sun rose, what was left of the procession of the 9 houses was a ring of kneeling men and women, and a wide field of ash beyond them. The banners were gone. The drums were gone. The horses were gone. The elder vampires of the deep caves were gone. Only the leaders remained. I had my coven come down from the cathedral. They walked between the kneeling generals quietly. They did not gloat. I had taught them better than that. They lifted each kneeling figure under the arms and they walked them up the path to my hill, one by one, and they brought them through the obsidian gate and into the great inner chamber of the cathedral. The cursed soil released them only because I told it to. The thing beneath the hill, which had been my partner, hummed under our feet like a satisfied animal. I sat them in a half circle on the floor of the chamber. I sat in a plain chair before them. The empty 9th chair of the council was no longer empty. It sat to my left now. I had carried it up the hill myself, decades earlier, after I had quietly bought it from a junk keeper in the Lake Country who had not known what it was. The chair of the 3rd house. My father's chair. My brother's chair. I tapped it once with my fingertips. The generals saw it. The priests saw it. The elders saw it. They began, finally, to understand the shape of what had happened. I let them speak then. I let each of them say what they had to say. Some begged. Some bargained. Some accepted with quiet dignity what was coming. I listened to all of them. I did not interrupt. When the last one had finished, I spoke. I told them the 9 houses were ended. I told them the council was ended. I told them the kingdom of Velmore would have 1 house now. The 3rd. They would all live, all of them, every general and every priest and every elder. I would not kill the leadership of a kingdom I now ruled. I would not begin my reign with their blood. But every bloodline beneath them would be retied to the deep stone of the worst hill, and the deep stone would answer to me. Every vampire alive in Velmore would, from that night forward, breathe and hunger and sleep at the pleasure of the 3rd house. They would feel it in their bones. They would feel it in their teeth. They would never forget who held the leash. I let them think about that. I gave them an hour. Then I told them their second choice. They could leave the kingdom. They could ride out, all of them, that morning, with whatever they could carry, and they could cross the border and never come back. Their old estates would be given to the disowned, and the bastards, and the runaways who had come to my hill in the long quiet century. Their names would be struck from the council records. Their bloodlines would be retired. Or they could stay on the new terms as smaller houses of the 3rd and serve. They argued among themselves for the rest of that morning. By midday they had answered. Most of them stayed. A few rode out. I let them go. I did not pursue. The ones who stayed knelt in turn before the chair of my father and swore a new oath in the old tongue. With 7 words I taught them slowly and patiently, the way a teacher teaches a difficult child. The 7 words bound them to the deep stone. I sealed each oath with a drop of my blood on their lips. Some of them shuddered when they tasted it. Some of them did not. When it was finished, I stood. I walked out of the great inner chamber. I walked down the path of my hill in the late afternoon light, and I sat on a flat stone at the very bottom, where the escort had dropped me 100 years before. I sat there for a long time. The wind came down from the high crags. The dust moved at my feet. The smell of old iron was still there, but it was quieter now. It knew me. I thought about my mother. I thought about her wedding ring on the smallest finger of my right hand. I thought about my brothers and the marble corridors and the laughter of the 8 houses under the blood-red moon. I thought about the cracked leather book in the 3rd house library, which had crumbled to dust by now in an estate that no longer existed. I thought about the boy I had been, sitting in this same dust 100 years ago, looking up at a tomb he had been told was the end of him. I touched my mother's ring with my thumb. I stood. I walked back up the hill. The obsidian gate opened for me. I went inside. The cathedral above the old cursed tomb had become the heart of a kingdom, and the worst hill in Velmore had become the only hill that mattered, and the gray-eyed boy that nobody had wanted had become the quiet, patient lord of every bloodline that breathed beneath the deep stone. The curse they had given me as a joke had been, all along, a sealed pact older than their houses. The tomb they had handed me, as my grave had been my throne. The hillside they had cursed in laughter under a blood-red moon, now decided who would live forever in Velmore. And the ones who would live forever, every one of them, knew my name. They said it quietly. They said it with respect. They said it the way you say the name of the thing beneath the hill. Kalen Vance of the 3rd house. Lord of the worst hill. Keeper of the deep stone. The disowned son who had outlived every man who ever laughed at him, and who would, by the patient promise of a sleeping pact, outlive every man who came after.